The dead moon had no name, just a number on a coalition map and a red X where the Harrow had hit. Rael Dorn moved through the rubble with his rifle low. The settlement had been Dracavari, a small one, maybe 300 residents. Traders mostly, families, the kind of place that didn't show up in war reports until it was already gone. The squad ahead of him was fast. Sergeant Bond was pulling data cores from a collapsed comm tower. Two others were marking salvage tags on anything the Coalition quartermaster would want. Nobody was checking the side ruins. Nobody thought there was a point. Rael checked the side ruins. He had learned something in 11 years of ground campaigns. The Harrow always hit fast and moved on. They didn't sweep for survivors. They didn't need to. Their strikes were designed to collapse everything at once: buildings, air supply, thermal shielding. If something survived the first 10 minutes, it survived by luck or by being very small and very still. He stepped over a broken wall and into what used to be a home. The ceiling had come down in one piece, leaning against the far wall like a ramp. Underneath it, sheltered from the strike, was a stone nest, wide, deep, built into the floor the way Dracavari always built them, permanent, generational, meant to last centuries. The adult was dead, a female by the scale pattern. She had curled herself around the nest when the ceiling came down. The impact had killed her instantly. Her body had done the rest, held the debris off the nest like a shield, kept the cold out, kept the hatchlings breathing. There were 3 of them. The largest one had red scales and was already hissing at him, small teeth, tiny claws scraping against the stone. The second one, teal, slightly smaller, had pressed itself against the far side of the nest and was watching him with amber eyes that didn't blink. The third was barely visible, ash-gray, tucked under the teal one's wing, not moving at all. Rael stood there for a moment. The red one hissed again, louder. It was the bravest and most foolish thing he had seen all week, considering he could have crushed all 3 of them under one boot. He did not crush them. He crouched down slowly, set his rifle on the ground beside him, and held out his hand, palm up, fingers open, the way he had read somewhere that you were supposed to approach something that was scared and didn't know your language. The red one snapped at his fingers, missed, hissed again. The teal one watched. The gray one still didn't move. Rael checked the gray one, still breathing shallow, too slow but alive, probably the youngest, probably hadn't eaten since before the strike. He made a decision. He told himself it was a tactical one. He told himself a lot of things. He pulled the thermal lining out of his pack, the emergency one, rated for vacuum exposure, and spread it out beside the nest. He lifted the red one first. It bit his glove hard enough to leave marks in the material. He set it on the thermal sheet. He lifted the teal one. It went stiff but didn't bite. Then the gray one, carefully, 2 hands, the way you moved something fragile. He wrapped them together, all 3, snug enough to share heat. The red one was still furious. The teal one had stopped being stiff and was now watching his face with an expression he could not read. The gray one made a sound, not a hiss, something smaller, something that did not belong on a battlefield at all. He tucked them into his pack, the main compartment. He moved his rations and his spare charge packs to the outer pouches. He made room. It was not a large pack. Dorn, Bond's voice on the comm. We're pulling out, dropship in 8. Copy, Rael said. He looked at the dead female in the nest for a moment. There was nothing he could do for her. There was nothing anyone could do for any of the 300 people who had lived here. That was the nature of being 8 minutes behind the Harrow. He adjusted the pack straps, careful not to compress the main compartment. He picked up his rifle. He walked back through the rubble, rejoined the squad at the extraction point, boarded the dropship, and sat in the far corner with his pack on his lap instead of the overhead rack. Bond glanced at him, looked at the pack, looked at Rael's face. Said nothing. The dropship lifted. The dead moon fell away beneath them. Through the small viewport, Rael watched the settlement disappear into the gray surface, just another cluster of ruins on a rock with no name. He felt something move against his spine. Slow, rhythmic, 3 small heartbeats through the thermal lining pressing against his back. The red one had stopped biting. The teal one had gone still in the way that meant calm, not fear. The gray one was breathing deeper now, warmer, steadier. Rael stared at the back of the seat in front of him and said nothing. He told himself he would figure out what to do when they reached the ship. He would report it through the right channels, file a Zenobio intake form, hand them off to the appropriate department. He told himself that for the entire 4-hour transit back to the warship. He almost believed it. The first night, the red one chewed through a power cable. Not a small cable, not a spare. The primary thermal regulation line running under the floor panel of Rael's bunk quarters, the one that controlled heat distribution for his entire section of the deck. By the time the ship's maintenance system flagged it, 17 crew members had filed cold complaints, and a junior technician was crawling through the subflooring looking for a rodent. There were no rodents on Coalition warships, until now, apparently. Rael fixed the cable himself at 300. He told the maintenance log it was wear damage. He said it with a straight face. The red one watched him work from the corner of his bunk, scales glinting in the low light, looking deeply unbothered. Rael pointed at her, she hissed. He went back to soldering. He had named them by the second day, which he would later identify as his first real mistake. Not because names were sentimental, they were just practical. He needed to call them something when whispering urgently at them to get back in the pack before someone opened his door. Sierra for the red one, because she acted like she owned every room she entered. Kavu for the teal one, because she observed everything with the patience of something twice her age. Nyx for the gray one, because she was quietest, and because she had taken to sleeping attached to his forearm like a small, warm anchor. The problem with Nyx was that she would not let go, not during meals, which he now ate at his bunk instead of the mess hall, not during his equipment checks, not when he slept. She had decided with complete finality that his left arm was her territory, and she defended it from Sierra with a ferocity that was disproportionate to her size. Kavu was the strangest of the three. She did not chew things. She did not attach herself to him. She sat in front of his terminal, inches from the screen, and watched. Whatever he left open, navigation feeds, crew logs, translated Dracavari cultural archives he had quietly pulled from the ship's Zenobio database. She watched all of it with the same calm, amber eyes. He started leaving the cultural archive open on purpose. He told himself that was also tactical. On day 3, Bond found them. He had come to return a charge pack he had borrowed 2 weeks earlier. He opened the door, saw Sierra standing on Rael's footlocker with a piece of thermal wire in her mouth, and stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Those are dragon hatchlings." "Dracavari," Rael said. "Right," Bond said. He stepped inside and closed the door. "How long?" 3 days. Bond looked at Nyx on Rael's arm. He looked at Kavu at the terminal. He looked at Sierra, who had begun chewing the wire more aggressively now that there was a larger audience. "What are you feeding them?" That was the other problem. Standard Coalition ration protein, the compressed blocks that made up 60% of Rael's daily intake, was mildly toxic to Dracavari biology. He had learned this on day 1 when Sierra ate a corner of his ration block and spent 2 hours looking deeply unwell. He had learned it more thoroughly on day 2 when he found the relevant entry in the Zenobio database and spent an hour staring at the chemical breakdown feeling like the worst person in any known star system. He had been giving them water and small pieces of the thermal cell matter from his emergency kit, a mineral compound that the database said was close to what Dracavari hatchlings needed in the absence of their mother's fire protein. It was keeping them alive. It was not keeping them well. Bond, without being asked, began diverting protein mineral supplements from the medical supply stores the next morning. He filed them under equipment maintenance compounds. He had a talent for creative logistics that Rail had always respected. Together they worked out a blend. Mineral compound, raw supplement powder, trace amounts of a heated carbon paste that Kavu in particular ate with focused enthusiasm. It was not elegant. It was not what they needed long-term. But Nick stopped looking hollow around the eyes by day 4, and Sierra stopped losing scales on her wingtips, and Kavu began gaining weight at a pace that suggested she had opinions about portion sizes. On day 5, Commander Roan announced a morale inspection of the lower decks in 48 hours. Rail sat on his bunk with Nix on his arm and Kavu at his terminal, and Sierra draped across his feet like a small, opinionated blanket, and thought about that for a while. Bon, standing in the doorway with a new batch of supplement powder, watched Rail's face go through several expressions in quick succession. "You could report them," Bon said. "I know," Rail said. "The Zenobio department would. I know what they'd do." Bon was quiet. Sierra made a small sound, not a hiss, something lower. She had been doing it more frequently in the evenings, this low rumbling at the back of her throat, directed at nothing in particular. The database called it thermal humming, a comfort behavior in young Dracavari, usually done in response to warmth and proximity. She was doing it because Rail's feet were warm, because she was fed, because she was safe. Rail looked at the three of them, Nix on his arm, Kavu reading, Sierra humming at his feet, and said, to no one in particular, "I am completely ruined." Bon left the supplement powder on the shelf and did not comment. Nix gave them away with a boot buckle. Commander Dasha Roan was 3 steps into Rail's quarters, clipboard in hand, inspection voice fully engaged, when the gray hatchling crawled out from under the bunk and sat down directly on her left boot. Roan looked down. Nix looked up. There was a moment of complete silence on both sides. Sierra, who had been hidden inside Rail's spare helmet at the top of the locker, chose this exact moment to sneeze. Roan looked at the locker, then back at Nix, then at Rail, who was standing at attention beside his bunk with the expression of a man reviewing the decisions that had brought him to this particular moment. "Dorn," Roan said. "Commander," Rail said. "Explain." He explained. All of it, the dead moon, the nest, the mother's body, the 3 survivors. He kept it factual. He used the word retrieval instead of rescue. He did not mention names. He did not mention that Kavu had been teaching herself Coalition Standard from his terminal for 5 days and could now read basic navigation headers. Roan listened without interrupting. That was somehow worse than if she had yelled. When he finished, she looked at the 3 hatchlings, Nix still on her boot, Sierra on the locker, Kavu having emerged from behind the bunk to observe the proceedings with her usual unblinking patience, and she said, "They have no clan markings." "No," Rail said. "Which means no registered lineage, no political affiliation, no legal custodian under Dracavari code." "That's correct." She closed her clipboard. "I'll contact the refugee councils." She contacted all 3. The first council said the hatchlings had no verifiable clan lineage and therefore no claim on refugee resources. Their hands were tied legally. The second said they were stretched beyond capacity and could not accept unclaimed young without clan sponsors. The third did not respond for 6 hours and then sent a message that was polite and said nothing. Roll called a formal disposition meeting 2 days later. Rail sat in a hard chair across a narrow table and listened to the options laid out in clean, administrative language. Option 1, Xenobiology Research Station Outpost Narrow, fully staffed, experienced with exotic species. The fine print listed the station's primary function as controlled behavioral study. Rail had looked up Outpost Narrow the night before. It was not in the Coalition's public directory. That was enough. Option 2, Pending a species preservation petition, the hatchlings could be held in coalition medical storage, essentially stasis, until a Dracavari custodian could be located. Timeline: unknown, possibly years. Option 3. Transfer to a civilian humanitarian vessel for general alien-dependent care. The vessel had no Dracavari staff, no appropriate nutrition protocol, and currently housed 63 other species in conditions that the last inspection report described as adequate. Roan presented all three options without visible preference. She was a fair officer. That was the thing about her. She was genuinely fair, which meant she had no personal cruelty in this, and somehow that made the whole thing worse. Rael had spent the previous night reading Coalition field regulations. All of them. He had a lot of free time since he stopped going to the mess hall. He raised his hand. Roan looked at him. He cited Regulation 7 Theta, Non-Combatant Dependent Survival Protocol, written after the Vila massacres, 40 years ago, when coalition forces had found human children in war zones with no surviving family and no legal custodian. The regulation allowed an active-duty service member to apply for temporary wardship of a recovered non-combatant dependent found in a combat zone, pending permanent placement. The regulation said dependent. It did not specify human. Roan stared at him for a long moment. That regulation was written for children, she said. It says dependent, Rael said. I checked 4 times. Dorn. They have no clan, no custodian, no placement. They were found in an active combat zone. He kept his voice flat. He had practiced the flat voice. Under 7 Theta, I meet every condition for temporary wardship application. The legal officer in the corner of the room had been very quiet for the last 2 minutes. She now made a small sound that might have been agreement, or might have been the sound of someone who did not want to be responsible for whatever happened next. Roan looked at the legal officer. The legal officer looked at her tablet and then, carefully, looked at the wall. Roan looked back at Rael. You understand this is temporary, she said, until a permanent solution is arranged. Understood, Rael said. You understand that this changes nothing about your operational duties. You deploy when ordered. You don't get mission exceptions. Understood. And you understand that if those animals cause any further damage to ship infrastructure, it comes out of your. Understood. She signed the form. She did it with the pen pressure of someone who had made her feelings available without saying them aloud. She slid it across the table. Don't make me regret this, Dorn. He picked up the form. He did not smile. He waited until he was in the corridor to let out a breath. When he got back to his quarters, Kavu was sitting in front of his terminal. She had opened the regulation database on her own. Her snout was 2 inches from the screen, actually reading the text of Regulation 7 Theta. She looked up at him when he came in. He held up the signed form. She made a sound he had never heard from her before. Low, warm, not quite a hum, something older than language. He sat down on the bunk. Nix climbed onto his arm. Sierra jumped from the locker, missed his knee, grabbed his jacket, and hissed at him like it was his fault. He folded the form and put it in his chest pocket, close to where 3 small heartbeats had been thumping against him since a dead moon with no name. The jungle planet had no good name either. The coalition called it Forward Base Tauren. The locals, a small amphibious species called the Veth who had been farming its river deltas for 400 years, called it home, which was not a name anyone in the coalition thought to ask about until much later. Rael had been redeployed there 6 weeks after the wardship was approved. The hatchlings were officially logged as non-combatant dependents under his registration, which meant they had coalition ID tags, small ones, fitted around their necks by a medical officer who had asked 0 questions and seemed to be professionally committed to maintaining that policy. They stayed at the rear command post while he ran missions. That was the arrangement. That was what Roan had approved. That was what Rael had agreed to. They lasted 4 days before Sira found the ventilation grid. He came back from a 2-day forward sweep to find a maintenance notice on his quarters door and Bond sitting outside it with an expression of exhausted amusement. The notice said, "Unidentified fauna 3 units, located in mess hall ventilation, armory corridor junction and forward supply bay. Return to quarters." It had been filed by 6 different crew members. None of them had used the word dragon. They had used words like small-scaled creatures, fast-moving thermal entities, and from one very tired corporal, the little ones. Rael went inside. All 3 were present. Sierra was on the footlocker looking smug. Kavu was reading his terminal. Nix was on his bunk and appeared to have been waiting with significant emotional investment. He sat down, he looked at them, he said, "This can't keep happening." Sierra hissed cheerfully. He improved the ventilation covers the next day. They were out again on day 3. He reinforced the door seals. They were found at the armory corridor on day 5, sitting in a row watching a weapons maintenance drill through the corridor grading with focused, academic interest. The drill sergeant had noticed them halfway through, finished the drill anyway without comment, and then submitted a request through Bond asking whether the dependent fauna were allowed to attend future sessions for educational purposes. Rael had stared at that request for a long time before filing it under problems for later. On the 4th escape, he found them himself. He had come off a rough patrol, 2 contacts, no casualties but close, the kind of night that left static in his head for hours. He was checking the perimeter before heading in when he saw 3 small shapes sitting on the forward wall in the dark, still as stones, looking out at the jungle tree line. He climbed up and sat beside them without speaking. The jungle at night was loud, creatures calling in the canopy, rain somewhere in the distance, the low hum of the base's perimeter field. Kavu's eyes were tracking movement in the trees. Sierra's scales were puffed slightly against the cool air. Nix was pressed against Rael's side the moment he sat down. He stayed quiet for a while. Sometimes silence was the whole conversation. Then Kavu spoke. Her coalition standard was broken and slow, built word by word from whatever she had pulled out of his terminal over the weeks. But she got it out, one piece at a time, the way you move through unfamiliar terrain, carefully, testing each step. She asked him why he kept leaving, why he came back tired but kept going, what he was fighting for out in the dark when he could not see the end of it. Rael looked at the tree line for a while. He told her he did not always know. He said that was the honest answer, and she deserved honest answers. He told her some days the reason was as small as the person standing next to you, and some days it was bigger than he could hold in one thought, and most days it was somewhere in between. He told her the one thing he was always sure about, the one thing that stayed clear even when everything else was static, was that the 3 of them deserved to exist in a galaxy that wasn't trying to unmake them. He wasn't sure how much she understood. Her standard was still young. His Dracavari was near 0, but she watched his face while he talked the way she watched everything with her whole attention, like she was reading him the same way she read his terminal, storing it, processing it. Sierra made a sound beside him. He glanced over. She was trying to breathe fire. He had seen her attempt it twice before, little bursts of effort that produced nothing, or at best a faint warmth against his palm. Dracavari hatchlings didn't develop fire breath until their secondary throat chambers matured, usually around the 4-month mark. She was close. He could tell by the way she held her neck now, the angle different from before. She exhaled. A flame came out, small, about the size of a candle, unsteady, guttering in the jungle air, but real fire from a living Dracavari for the first time. She looked at it like she was not entirely sure what to do with the information. Rael said nothing, he just watched. After a moment, Sierra looked at him. He gave her a single nod. She turned back to the tree line and did it again, steadier this time. He climbed down from the wall a little while later. Nyx rode his shoulder. Sierra and Kavu flanked him on either side, small shapes moving through the dark at his feet. The perimeter guards at the gate watched them come in. Neither one said anything. They had been watching Rael Dorn come and go from this post for 6 weeks. They had noticed, without commenting, that the most dangerous part of any mission he ran was apparently the walk home. The summons came through diplomatic channels, which meant it came through 7 layers of bureaucratic formatting before it reached Rael as a simple order. Report to Neutral Docking Ring 4, Coalition Warship Ardent, for a formal species custody hearing. The Dracovari fleet commander's name was Vreth. He had survived Ashenvale's fall by being off-world when the Harrow hit, running a supply convoy 3 systems out, watching the colony's beacon go silent from the flight deck. He had spent 14 months since then doing the thing that no one in any government was doing, looking for survivors. He had found a few, scattered adults, mostly injured, one young clutch on a refugee transport. And then, through a coalition record search his diplomatic aide had run quietly and without authorization, he had found a wardship registration for 3 unclaimed hatchlings under the name of a ground infantry soldier named Rael Dorn. He was not angry. That was the thing Rael noticed first when he entered the hearing room aboard the Ardent. Vreth was not performing anger. His scales, deep bronze, darkened at the edges with age, were still. His voice, when he spoke through the translation unit, was measured. He was a grieving elder, not a hostile opponent, and the precision of that distinction made the whole room quieter. He made his case clearly. The hatchlings had no clan mark, yes, but they were Dracovari. They carried genetic lineage from one of the oldest remaining bloodlines on Ashenvale. They deserved to know what that meant. They deserved their language, their fire songs, the names of their ancestors, the rituals that marked each stage of their growth. A human soldier, and Vreth was careful to say this without contempt, could not provide those things. No matter how capable, no matter how committed, a human warrior was not equipped to raise Dracovari young. The Coalition legal observer wrote everything down. Commander Roan sat in the corner and watched Rael's face. Rael sat still and did not argue, because Vreth was right. He knew it. He had known it for weeks, quietly in the back of his head, the place where he kept the things he was not ready to do anything about yet. Then Kavu stood up. She had been sitting between Sierra and Nyx on the bench beside Rael. No one had suggested she speak. No one had indicated that a hatchling was permitted to address a formal tribunal. She stood up anyway, because she had read enough coalition regulations to know that no one had specifically said she couldn't. She spoke in coalition standard first. Slow and careful, the way she always spoke, choosing words like she chose footholds. She said she knew what she had lost. She had read about Ashenvale. She knew about fire songs and clan ceremonies and the way her species marked their young for the world to know who they were. She knew she had none of that. She knew Rael could not give her those things. Then she switched languages. It was halting. It was incomplete. Some of the words were wrong, the tones off, the breath patterns imprecise. Vreth's translator unit went silent because it was not designed to process a Dracovari hatchling speaking the elder dialect of her own language, pulled word by word from a cultural archive on a human soldier's terminal. But Vreth understood her. She said roughly, imperfectly in the language of her own people, that she knew what she had lost. She also knew what she had found. She said that when she was in the ruins, starving, too frightened to move, it was not a Dracovari who had come back and looked in the rubble a second time. The room was very quiet. Vreth looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at Rael. Rael looked back at him and said nothing, because there was nothing to add. Vreth was quiet for a long time, long enough that the Coalition legal observer stopped writing, long enough that Sierra, who had been scowling at the formal proceedings for the last 20 minutes with the energy of someone who found bureaucracy personally offensive, went still. Vreth asked Rael one question, not through the translator, in the 12 words of Coalition standard that he knew. "You come back," Vreth said, "every time." "Every time," Rael said. Vreth was quiet again. Then he looked at Kavu. He said something to her in the elder dialect, something short, something that made her raise her head and straighten her spine in the way she only did when something mattered. The ruling that came from the Tribunal was unusual. The legal observer said she had not seen anything like it in 20 years of coalition proceedings. Vreth's fleet would provide cultural education, language sessions, fire song instruction, clan-marking ceremony when the hatchlings were of age. A formal lineage would be researched and assigned. The cultural inheritance would be complete. Rael would retain wardship. The hatchlings would travel between both. No one got everything. Everyone got what mattered. Afterward, Rael and Vreth stood on the docking bay walkway watching Sierra chase Kavu around a loading crane, while Nyx sat on a cargo container and observed with her usual calm judgment. Vreth watched them for a while, then he said in careful standard, "You fight very strangely, human." Rael watched Sierra breathe a small flame at Kavu, who dodged it with practiced patience. "I've been told," he said. The intelligence report came in at 400, and by 600 every officer on the warship had read it twice. A Dracovari vault sealed pre-war, containing 112 viable eggs from 7 different bloodlines, had been located on a derelict station near the front line. The station had been dark for 3 years. The Harrow had found it 6 days ago and were 60 hours from cracking the vault's biological seals. Once the seals were open, the contents would be processed the same way the Harrow processed everything: consumed, cataloged, gone. The Coalition authorized a strike mission: high risk, fast insertion, fast extraction, 4-person team. Rael volunteered before the briefing was over. He told the hatchlings that night. He sat on the floor of his quarters. They had long since claimed his bunk entirely, and he kept it short and practical. He told them where he was going and why. He told them he would be back in 4 days. He told them Bon would handle their meals. He tried to keep his eyes on the wall behind them. He was better with difficult things when he didn't look directly at them. Sierra grabbed his wrist with both front claws. Not hard, not a bite, just held on the way she hadn't done since the first month. Kavu stood and pressed her forehead to the back of his hand slowly, deliberately. He had seen that gesture in the cultural archive. He had seen Vreth do it to 2 of his crew when they left for a dangerous transit. The database called it a bond mark, a Dracovari gesture that said, "You are known to me and I will hold that until you come back." He had not expected to be on the receiving end of it. He held still and let her. Nyx was last. She didn't do anything complicated. She just said, "Please, don't leave us behind." 6 words, the clearest she had ever spoken. No hesitation, no wrong sounds. Rael looked at her then. He hadn't meant to, but he did. He said, "I'll come back." He went anyway, because someone had to, because that was the truth he had told them on the perimeter wall, and he didn't have a different one. The station was a maze. Old Coalition design, pre-war era, the kind built for deep storage with no thought to navigation ease. The Harrow had already breached the outer ring. The team moved through the dark with IR visors and minimal comms, and everything that could go wrong started going wrong around hour 6. They lost Terran at the 3rd junction, a pressure charge, fast, no warning. They lost Corsa at the vault antechamber, buying time for Rael and the last team member, a young tech named Fala, to get the vault's biological seal into extraction mode. Rael took a concussive blast from a Harrow Sentinel unit while covering Fala at the vault door. His left ear went out completely. The world went sideways and loud in the way that meant something structural had shifted in his head. He finished the cover anyway. He dragged himself upright and he finished it. The vault opened. 112 eggs, each sealed in individual cryo casing, reading viable. Fala got the emergency beacon out. The extraction shuttle was there in 40 minutes. They came back on day 6. 2 days late, Corsa and Terran in the ship's memorial database. One ear that would never fully come back. Rail's armor held together in 3 places with field patches that the maintenance officer would later describe as creative. He walked into the rear post at forward base Torin in the early morning. The jungle was doing its loud thing. The light was gray and wet. He heard them before he saw them. Sierra hit him first, full speed from somewhere to his left, claws on his chest plate, all of her body weight, which was considerably more than it had been 4 months ago on a dead moon. He caught her mostly by reflex. Kavu hit his right side a half-second later, quieter but no less forceful, her forehead pressing immediately to the side of his jaw, bond mark again, held there. Nyx went under his arm. She found the gap between his chest plate and his side plate and pushed her face into it and stayed there. Sierra was yelling at him, not in Coalition standard. In Dracavari, the words from Vreth's sessions, loud and rapid, the tones all wrong from emotion but unmistakable in intent. She was furious. She had been counting the days. He was 2 over. Kava was shaking, just slightly. She didn't shake. He had never seen her shake. Rail sat down on the floor of the embarkation bay. Not because he chose to. Because the 3 of them and the weight of the week and the ringing in his left ear all arrived at the same time, and the floor seemed like the right place. He sat there in battered armor with all 3 of them piled across him, Sierra still talking. Kavu pressed against his neck, Nyx not moving from his ribs, and he held on. Bon was standing in the bay doorway. He had been there since the comms reported Rail's shuttle on approach. He watched all of it and said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, to no one in particular, never seen anything like that in this whole war. Rail Dorn, 38 years old, veteran of 11 campaigns, 1 ear ringing and armor in pieces, thought about the vault, the eggs, Corsa and Terran, the 4 days that became 6. He thought about Nyx's 6 words. He thought this was the only mission that was never in doubt.